Support for Consider This is provided by Sequent Planning, an SEC-registered investment advisor, helping people make informed retirement income decisions. Additional information is available at sequentomaha.com.
From the campus of the University of Nebraska at Omaha. Consider This, a program of issues and information behind today's news.
You can keep bananas fresh longer by wrapping the stem with plastic wrap. For those pesky herbs that go bad, freeze them in olive oil to keep them fresh for longer. Want to prevent freezer burn on your ice cream? Cut the top down as you eat and pop the lid on to cut down on air exposure. Store your potatoes with apples to keep them from sprouting, and store your tomatoes stem down to make them last longer. You can keep a lemon juicy for longer by storing it in the fridge, but store your bread at room temperature. While you're at it, move your dairy to the top shelf where it's coldest. Sick of berries going bad? Store them in a single layer so the juices don't fall down to the bottom row. After you make some fresh guacamole, pour a little water over it before storing it to keep it from browning.
And that's just the beginning. Hi everyone, I'm Kathy Wyatt. Welcome to this week's edition of Consider This. Our topic, food preservation. Joining us to talk more about it is Nancy Urbanek. Nancy is a Nebraska Extension Associate in Douglas and Sarpy counties. Her specialty is food, nutrition, and health. Thank you so much for being here and welcome.
Thank you for having me.
You betcha. Nancy, I want to start with this. I want to start with this banana. Talk about its typical shelf life.
Typically, when a banana is ripe, it's going to keep about 2 to 5 days on the countertop. You put it in the fridge, you get about 5 to 7 days. But there's lots of ways we can extend that shelf life, and not just about bananas, but other produce that we have.
Excellent. And as we go through this interview, we're going to work our way toward that very solution. Tell me, we have a graphic and we want to put it up for our viewers. What would cause this banana to go bad or to spoil?
Well, not just that banana, but also all kinds of fruits and vegetables, is that the enzymes in them are a protein that is in all the molecules of a fruit or a vegetable that allows it to continue to mature and get ripe. And that then causes spoilage. Once it's too ripe, it just begins to break down. There's also oxygen, and we're surrounded by oxygen. So oxygen allows bacteria, microorganisms, which is our next one, to develop and cause food spoilage.
Which generally then results in what?
Us throwing things away.
Yeah.
We have a very varied idea of what we like our produce to be like when we eat it. There are people that have personal preferences, but also the microorganisms can make it bad, cause you to become ill if you eat the mold and yeast that maybe develop because of the exposure to the oxygen, and can have you become ill with that. So we do toss it.
And we certainly don't want that to happen. And that one banana doesn't seem like a whole lot until you start to factor it in with everything else that we let go. And I was very surprised to learn, and I'm hoping you can explain this for us, the National Resources Defense Council, right, said that we do not consume 40% of the food in the United States, right? We don't eat that. So what's the explanation?
Well, I personally at home, I can tell you that it's a time constraint sometimes. We think, oh, one batch of bananas is good, we'll buy 2 because they're really inexpensive right now, and they go bad on the countertop. Or we also look at it that when we are purchasing things, maybe we don't know how best to hold it to get the extended shelf life of that also.
Okay, and so when we really stop to think about all that waste, what are the consequences that maybe we're not thinking about?
I think we're not thinking about some of those methane gases that the greenhouse effect actually has, that, you know, as things rot, it produces those methane gases and is, you know, environmentally not good for us. But I think we also need to remember it's wasting resources when we aren't utilizing all of the produce that we have, because you put time, energy, water, resources into growing it, and then if it sits there and just rots, it's a waste of our resources and time.
Wow. Okay, so that's where food preservation comes into play.
Yes.
How do you define that then?
How I define food preservation is extending shelf life of produce or products that I have in my home by destroying microorganisms in a manner that's appropriate, that has been tested and is safe.
Okay, and this isn't new. Another thing I discovered. So I found a timeline while I was searching around for things. This goes back hundreds of thousands of years. We're going to put up a timeline, and as we do that, pull out what is important for us to know on here.
Well, I think dehydration, like the sun drying in 20,000 BC, goes back way, way before time. And we still do dehydrating now. We just do it in a manner that is more effective and efficient because we have electricity. Jam preparation, curing things, really, when you look at that really is more for salting items to hold things, because they didn't have commercial refrigeration at that time. They needed to hold it. They didn't want it, you know, the pork to go bad in the slaughterhouse, or the sausages to go bad. So that was curing, salting, and making sure everything stayed safe also. And then as we move towards the canning and pasteurization, we basically look at that as commercial timeline. But also we need to look at that as when that was approximately about the time when canning jars came into existence, where we could actually do home food preservation ourselves and not rely on commercial canneries.
Okay, all right. So as I'm listening to you talk about all of this, I'm curious, what is your background? How did you get involved in this particular area?
Well, I think some of my fondest childhood memories are basically we were child labor on the farm, and so we would go out and pick. We jokingly say that we were not child labor, but production was important. We picked sweet corn, we husked it, and my mom and my aunt and my grandmother then was in the kitchen blanching it, cutting it off the ears, putting it into the freezer so that we could consume it later on, helping in the garden, picking peas so that we could shell peas so that we could freeze them. My mom having crocks of pickles in the kitchen, and knowing that she was going to produce them, can them, so that we could have those later on in the summer. Wow. Or not summer, but fall and winter.
We've got viewers right now, I'm sure, who are watching and going, oh my gosh, I can so relate to that. I remember all of that. Do you have a favorite memory from the farm in terms of maybe, it doesn't even have to be specific to the topic today, but I just think that would be kind of cool for the viewers to hear.
I think probably my favorite, especially when we start seeing sweet corn coming onto the trucks on the corners of the area into the farmers market and stuff. That's really a really fun memory. Because of course it was my grandparents, it was I and my siblings, it was my mom, it was my cousins and my aunts, and it was a family affair. It wasn't just, you didn't just do this by yourself, you did it as a whole community, and then everything was divided. So.
Okay. And for people who've never been to a farmer's market, how would you paint a picture of that? Because we hear a lot about them nowadays.
Yes, and we have some great ones in Omaha between Exarban and downtown, and we have a lot of really small ones in the area also that are great. You know, when I go to them, I love seeing all the different kinds of produce that's available. Our daughter, when she lived in Washington State, she got very used to having a lot more berries because they grow berries in Washington, different environment and such. And we were there, and I actually had to ask what certain things were for produce in their state compared to farmers markets here, because I was not familiar with them. It's not something we grow locally.
And I was just going to say, you're probably that person that goes in with a completely different set of eyes, different perspective than the rest of us who are just kind of there to shop around and see what's new, right?
Yeah.
Okay, now you're an educator.
I'm an extension assistant, but I do educate. Yes.
Yeah, so you take this topic out into the community. How do you, just curiously, begin a presentation like this? How do you broach this topic with folks?
You know, we really talk about food preservation as something that it's something that can be very safe. Please don't think it's intimidating. If you follow the steps, the rudimentary steps of food preservation, every single time you do it, you will have success. I tell them also that every single canning season, I sit down with my resources and I read through them to make sure that I have all the little things, the nuances that I need to do to make sure I'm doing it safely. I do it safely also. So when I go out and I tell people, this is what you need to do, I don't just say that. I mean it and I follow that to the letter because I love my family and I would never want to make anybody ill.
Okay, now who's in the audience when you're doing? I would imagine it's a wide variety of people.
It really is, and not just an audience, but also people that are calling and stopping in at the office and asking about food preservation and such. I think because of the local food sources that we have available, people interested in growing their own, that they don't want to waste their food. They want to have long-term use of it. And to do that, they have to have some basic knowledge about food preservation.
So what is the most commonly asked question that you receive either on the phone or when you're out in the community?
Boy, most commonly asked question, I would guess is probably, do I really have to process that in a pressure canner? Whether it be green beans or corn or carrots, a low acid food, because people are intimidated by pressure canning because they've heard horror stories of all the terrible things that can happen and such. But really knowing that low pH means you've got to do it in a pressure canner so that it has a chance to destroy any of the microorganisms and give you a good shelf stable sealed product.
Yeah, and you have quite a lot to cover when you're out and about, and sometimes when you think about the pressure cooker like you talked about or the pressure canner and nutrition and health, I mean sometimes people shut down before they even come to see somebody like you trying to educate them on what's going on here. So as you're presenting and you're looking out at your audience or you're on the phone and you sense I'm losing them here, how do you reel them back in?
You would be amazed when they call or when they come, they are so engaged in what's going on because they truly want to be there. They're not being forced to be there because their license depends on it or because their job depends on it. They are there because they really truly want and need that information at that moment.
And they're hearing it how? How do they generally hear about those types of opportunities?
For canning classes or classes in general through Extension, we have a website, we have a Facebook account, a Pinterest, all the social media kinds of things that are out there and such. So we do advertise that way, or if you just call the office and ask what's going on, we also answer those questions that way too.
Awesome. Okay, before we roll up our sleeves, let's talk a little bit about this office. What else are you there to do other than talk about food preservation?
I do a lot of food safety classes. We do Serve Safe Managers class, Serve Safe Food Handlers class, so restaurants, child care providers, all of those kinds of individuals that are preparing food for the masses are getting trained through us. We have a horticulture area that answers those questions on growing produce and trees and turf and all that kind of stuff. We have a learning child program that we have individuals that answer and do training for child care providers so that they are providing information for our youth, our 0 to 4, and then we also have our 4-H area that that's really big across the nation and such, and teaching our youth about leadership, STEM education, and all of that. So we have a wide variety, very eclectic group of individuals. I say that I work with every day. I never come out of the office not learning something new at my job from somebody or from myself.
That's good for people to know too, and you guys are very helpful. I mean, that's what you're there to do. So
we try and be.
People call your main line and they say, here's the deal. This is what I'm trying to accomplish. This is my hoped outcome, and then you get them where they need to be.
Yes.
All right. So thank you for sharing that. All right, so let's get back into food preservation. So techniques, and as you're talking a little bit more in depth about the techniques, we're going to put up another graphic so that our viewers can kind of see, put those in order there, and we selected 5. So,
so really the chemical technique for food preservation is more done commercially. Those items that are put into those food items that are going to be really long-term and canned metal jars or metal containers. Drying, whenever you have drying items in food preservation, we have dehydrators that we can use. All of your herbs and spices, well, really more herbs, can be dried and put into jars. And we had some running rampant this year was dill on in our gardens at the office, and so we got a lot of dried dill that just dried on the head, pulled it off, put it into jars, and we have great dilly bread now that we take out to farmers markets. Canning, that process is also divided into 2 separate categories when I try and talk about it. I have a boiling water bath that is for jams, jellies, fruits, and such, because boiling water boils at 212. It's never going to change. It's always going to boil at 212. And any jam, jelly, fruit, that's all the hotter it needs to be to destroy the microorganisms that could be possibly in there. But then we go to our pressure canner. When we talk about pressure canning, we're talking about our vegetables, like our green beans, corn, carrots, even meat products that we might consider canning instead of freezing. And so we put those into a pressure canner, because in a pressure canner it can get up to 242 degrees because of the pressure and of the heat and steam that's actually in that. Okay. And that's the temperature it needs to be able to destroy the microorganisms again and eliminate those enzymes. Then the last one, or the second to the last, is freezing. And so freezing, anytime you freeze, unless it is unless it's peppers or onions, you must blanch anything that you're going to put in the freezer. And the reason you do that is one of those spoilers was the enzymes that were in it. You deactivate enzymes by heating it. And so it deactivates the enzymes, keeps it from maturing, and it helps retain the shape of the product that you're putting into the freezer at that moment.
Huh, okay.
So.
And then the salting?
Oh, the salting. Don't do a lot of salting anymore, but really I look at that as salting and fermentation kind of play together. So our pickling, you use a lot of salt in pickling, and that's one thing you can't eliminate from the pickles, because you need to inhibit the water activity in the cucumbers to make those pickles appropriately and such. So, and those you do in a boiling water bath for shelf stability.
Okay. All right. This has been a lot for me to process. My daughters can really appreciate this interview right now, I'm sure. All right. So we have props. So let's take what we've talked about and apply it to what you have here. And I'm just trying to think, maybe if we identify each thing first, and then you can kind of delve into the more practical.
Okay.
What do you think?
Sounds good.
All right. So
let's go down here where we have the boiling water bath. Okay. And that's when we've got, and as an example, I have jalapeno pepper jelly that we made actually in August. And you put it into the jars, get your correct headspace on it, put your lids on and your rings on, and you put it inside of that boiling water bath. And the water needs to come 1 to 2 inches above the actual jar to make sure that when you're boiling it, it surrounds it. And part of that canning process is not just heating the jar through, but it's also extracting air out, so you get a good tight seal. So on this, it just taps, that it's nice, good and sealed. And if you don't get a good tight seal, then it's not shelf stable.
Because of the oxygen that you talked about earlier.
Right.
I was paying attention,
Yep.
Nancy.
Yep.
All right, very, very good.
Yep.
Okay.
The next thing is the pressure canner. And again, the pressure canner is the item that we use for our green beans, our meat products, anything that is a low acid food. And when we talk low acid food, those are green beans, corns, carrots. I did kale this summer. The whole house still smells like kale, but it will eventually dissipate. Never canned it before. Thought it would be fun to can, and I don't think I'll ever do it again. So, because it does smell a little bit.
Like what? What does it smell like?
It smells like kale. It really smells like kale. I can't describe kale. Can you?
All right. No, I know. I'm trying to come up with it right now.
But in the pressure canner, all you need is about 1 inch to 2 inches of water at the bottom. It doesn't have to surround the jars. So you've got that 1 to 2 inches at the bottom. You vent it. You bring your pressure up and this has a pressure gauge on it. There's some weighted gauge. There's dial gauges like this one. Bring it up to pressure. And then you as this is just a sealant that it just vents out of there. You put that on, bring the pressure up, and then let it process for the correct amount of time. And some items take 40 minutes. Kale actually took 1 hour and 10 minutes. It takes there's different times for different produce, and I know we're going to talk about different ways to find out where that information is in a little bit.
Right.
So then at the end, you bring the pressure, take it off the heat, bring the pressure down, take your weighted gauge off, and take the lid off, and then set it to the side and see if it canned or it's sealed up appropriately.
Wow. Okay, now you have lots of items over here.
The other couple things I have over here is like the diced tomatoes that I can in a boiling water bath actually. And with the diced tomatoes, because tomatoes are now so much more low acid than they originally were starting to be, many years ago you'd have people eat tomatoes raw and they'd get all cold sores and stuff because of the acid. Well, now they're so much lower in acid, you have to add either lemon juice or vinegar to them to raise the acidity level to make them safe to be canned in a boiling water bath in a pressure canner.
And so how much of that are you adding then to something that size?
In lemon, that I use lemon juice because that's my personal preference, is a tablespoon. So once you get it into, we do a lot of casseroles and chilies and things. You can't even tell.
Okay.
We're not eating them straight out, heating them and eating straight out of the jar. No,
okay.
That's not our forte.
Okay.
Such. Then the green beans, you don't add anything to them, unlike your cucumbers that you're making your pickles.
Right.
You can add salt to this. They're in the directions you can. I choose not to. We're trying to kind of watch our salt intake. So I just can them straight with boiling water and put them in the canner and process them.
Okay.
This right here, as you can see, it's sweating a little bit.
It was frozen.
It was frozen. Yeah. It still is frozen. But that actually is some salsa. You can see lots of recipes online through social media, but doesn't necessarily make them safe to be canned in a boiling water bath or a pressure canner. So if you have a favorite recipe that you don't have accurate canning information on, really good way to make your salsa and freeze it. You do not have to can it.
Wow.
You can put it in the freezer and you still have a very safe product.
One of the things that I wanted to be sure we asked, because folks are talking about it obviously, is the flooding. What would you say in terms of food preservation as it relates to that?
That was a really painful conversation in the spring with people that had leftover canning items from previous years and such. Once a canned item is put on the shelf and it comes in contact with any kind of flooding water, it must be thrown away.
Okay.
Unlike commercial cans that can be saved with multiple steps, canning items must be tossed. And so the UNL put together flood.unl.edu as a way for people to go and see what the directions were and the steps on how to save their commercially canned items.
Yeah, and I think I want to go to that website. So if we could put that graphic up now, you just mentioned it. I want people to be able to see it so that if they have questions, Nancy, because I think this is great.
Yeah.
It's food.unl.edu. Write that one down. And then the next one is for the National Center for Home Food Preservation. So those are two important websites for folks to know. And just your phone number?
402-444-7804.
And again, folks call that, and all they need to do is tell you what it is that they're trying to accomplish, and you're going to get them to the right area. I want to finish and wrap this up on this banana. So with everything we've talked about, how long could this last on the shelf?
Well, on the shelf, not going to really change.
Okay.
But you could freeze this, whether it be in the peel or whether you take it out of the peel and mash it, and it'll keep 6 to 8 months. Or I actually did do a little research before I came to see if I could find anything where you could use a banana, and I actually found some chutneys and jams that you can use bananas in to actually can and make them shelf stable.
Who'd have thought a banana could have taken us all the way through this interview? Nancy, I want to thank you so much for being here and sharing your time, your stories, all this great information, and wish you well moving forward.
Thank you.
As we close, a look at sculptures around UNO's campus as seen through the lens of Ellie McCartney, a senior at UNO. We'll see you next week.
Consider This is an issues and information program produced by UNO Television. More information and program archives can be found at netnebraska.org/Consider This. If you'd like to share your comments about this program, call UNO Television at 402-554-2516 during regular business hours, or send an email to cwyatt@unomaha.edu.
Support for Consider This is provided by Sequent Planning, an SEC-registered investment advisor, helping people make informed retirement income decisions. Additional information is available at sequentomaha.com.